is the Vintage RPG Podcast, your source for the best in classic and contemporary RPGs. With your hosts, Hambone and Stu.
Welcome to the Vintage RPG Podcast, coming at you again from the clubhouse, hidden somewhere in the swamps of New Jersey. I'm John Hambone McGuire, and with me, as always, is the editor-in-chief of Unwinnable.com. I once saw him take off his ascot and put it over a puddle so a lady could walk across. Stu Horvath.
It makes it sound like I wear like these gigantic ascots.
I didn't say it was a big puddle. Stu, how you doing today?
Pretty good. I only wear an ascot really on New Year's Eve. It's just a one-time thing.
Listen, I am struggling with the jokes sometimes because today we're going to talk about chivalry and
sorcery.
There you go. Another thing where they took two words and they combined it with an and it's a role-playing game.
Yeah.
Stu, why don't you tell the listeners about chivalry and sorcery?
So I've learned a little bit about myself. Writing this stupid, painful, hard-to-write book, it's been a journey, Hambone. A personal awakening. I realized that I have very strong knowledge of like the mid 80s to 2000. Then I have this gap from 2000 to like 2012, maybe a little bit later than that, 14 maybe. So, up to 85, and then from 2000 to 2014, I don't know what the heck is going on in role-playing games. Like, I just don't know.
Everyone's got a blind spot, man.
Yeah, I have these two really big blind spots. So the book is a chronological thing, so I've been immersing myself in the 70s role-playing games. And I've been picking them up, and wow, there's some weird ones, and some questionable decisions were made in role-playing. Like, it was just such a time, Hambone. They just didn't, no one knew anything, and you can tell. Like, it's just so obvious. Like, there's this moment where, like, D&D comes out, and everybody's just like, oh my God. It's like a clarifying moment where suddenly there were hundreds of people out there who knew that this was their destiny, but they didn't know it until the game came out. And once D&D comes out, it's like off to the races, and everybody's just like, well, I can do that too. I'm going to make my own. And that's sort of the thing that dominates the 70s.
Right. But when you think about it, like in the 70s, there was also Star Wars. And then once Star Wars happened, everyone was like, I can do it too. I can make my own. And to be fair, yeah, you can always go out and make a space opera and make a film and whatever. It'll be fine. But making an actual rule set to a game is a lot harder than mimicking a sci-fi movie, right?
Well, I mean, yeah. But like at the same time, like look at some of those imposter Star Wars movies. It's like that Buck Rogers TV show was not good.
You make a fair point.
This is some janky ass TV. So this impulse to make your own at the time pulls in all sorts of different directions. And the thing that you have to remember too is that there's no professionalized game designer class of people. Like these are all literally people playing games who are just like, well, I can do this. Let's make a game. And just trying stuff. There's no best methods, best practices yet. Like, it's a hobby that a whole bunch of people are jumping into. Chivalry and Sorcery is by Simbalist and Wilf Backhaus. And they are of the school that will be familiar to folks who listen to our fantasy wargaming episode. They believed that D&D wasn't realistic enough and set about making a truly realistic fantasy role-playing game.
Here we go again.
Yeah, and I really got to stress that the 70s, the idea of role-playing game, it doesn't exist yet. We sort of retroactively call these games role-playing games. It didn't really become a role-playing game until the 80s. Right now, it's definitely still a wargaming game that isn't like other wargaming. The ideas and the impulses that go into these early games is all really based in wargaming culture and things that people are preoccupied with in wargaming. And that's all like the really crunchy, like sort of ridiculous stuff that you don't care about in D&D, like weapon speed. And I know that like every time I trash weapon speed, somebody's like, it makes sense. And like, it does. I don't think that weapon speed is like stupid, but it's just not something that I care about tracking. But it is very emblematic of this idea that like you're simulating reality with a set of charts and math interacting. And Chivalry and Sorcery just amps this up like so much. I know that people have played Chivalry and Sorcery. I don't know how. This is a really complex system, and not in like even an interesting way. It's complex for complex sake. I think that this is an impulse in game design. It's very much like fantasy wargaming, where it's just like charts. Gotta have answers for everything, just try and quantify as much of the world into these charts and potential dice rolls. And it's fine, I guess, if you want like a light kind of war game, but no, I don't want to play this game ever.
It sounds like they house ruled a bunch of shit, but didn't actually write it into the book.
I mean, yes. And there's also an interesting thing about Fantasy Games Unlimited sort of like was really averse to putting out additional material. They did with Chivalry and Sorcery, but I don't have it, and stuff is a little hard to come by. So like I do think that there are source books and stuff for the game that might fix it, but I have the original red rulebook and it's super hostile to me. One of the things they did to make it cheaper to print was they reduced every page of text to 25% so they could float 4 pages on a single sheet of paper. So the text is really tiny. And it's also typeset in like typewriter text, which is really unfriendly to the eyes.
Yeah, that's not good at all for anyone who has special eyes.
Yeah. As a role-playing game, kind of not my thing. Not interested in learning the systems or really tooling around in it. I bounce right off of it. What is super interesting about it is there's a lot of really good historical material here, and it does do a better job of sort of reflecting this Middle Ages period in stats and in a system. There's a lot of historical value in that. It feels realistic in a way that I appreciate, and in a way that like D&D has ever really wanted to approach, but it's nice to see. But the thing that's really interesting is that Chivalry and Sorcery is one of the very first games to publish a campaign setting.
Really?
Not only did it publish a campaign setting, it published one that had dinosaurs in it.
Well, I love dinosaurs. Tell me more.
That one I don't own, but I would love to because it has dinosaurs in it. It's basically like what if, medieval, but with dinosaurs, is my understanding, which I think is just a really interesting choice coming from the folks who created a super dry and realistic medieval role-playing game. But now we're also going to release a campaign setting that has dinosaurs. And you could ride dinosaurs, and you could fight dinosaurs, you could be eaten by dinosaurs. I kind of love that. I think that's awesome.
Oh, absolutely.
I love how like the early role-playing game designers were like almost like 2 sets of impulse. It's like realism and quantification, and then like just these wild flights of whimsy. It's unfortunate that those things didn't cross-pollinate in the actual core Chivalry and Sorcery book. They have one that's sort of based on medieval England called Arden. They are meticulously made whole world source books. Arden is, as I said, I don't have the Saurian world book, but Arden has like so many maps and everything is just laid out for you, and it's a whole world in a way that is different. I mean, at this point, like this is 1977, so you're 3 years into this. You don't have a lot of competition. You're looking at like, in terms of campaign worlds, Greyhawk and Blackmoor are lies. They don't exist as campaign worlds. Empire of the Petal Throne is a campaign world in the sense that we understand it. And that's basically it. I guess City State of the Invincible Overlord is out from Judges Guild. And like there's really these 2 early role-playing game campaigns at this point, partly because Gary Gygax didn't want to release one. He didn't think that anybody would be interested in it.
Could you imagine that?
You're right. Like, how did that happen?
And after like the laundry list of campaigns and like adventures and modules that were released since that point, it's like, what a misstep, because it would have dramatically changed the RPG landscape if they had never come out with like D&D modules. Because he was like, I don't think anyone's actually going to want this.
Tomb of Horrors is like 78. That's 4 years later. How did that happen? It's just flummoxing. Like, Gygax, no gods, no heroes, man. Like, him and Arneson created role-playing games, and you have to hand it to them. But I'm not sure that there's anything else that Gygax did that really speaks to sort of like the demigod level genius that he is ascribed to have. The man didn't think that modules were a thing, That's a fundamental misstep and misreading of what role-playing games will become,
Hey, man, I think some would agree that creating it by itself was more than enough.
Absolutely. And I really do believe that it's those 2 guys. I'm more in the Arneson as, like, if you had to pick one as the creator. I do feel like Arneson is the one who really focused on a thing that was unique, whereas I think that a lot of the wargaming stuff comes in through Gygax more so than Arneson. But role-playing games, all of this would not exist if it wasn't for those two guys. And it's like an accomplishment beyond calculation that they made this thing happen. And you could never take that away from them. But it's also interesting that they also never really did anything again. Like they never made another game that anybody really remembers, right?
Yeah, I don't remember anything else.
I just think that's interesting. But yeah, Chivalry and Sorcery is sort of like an evolutionary dead end in role-playing games. I really thought that it was just fantasy wargaming that took that path, but no, there are others that took the path too and perished.
Yeah, seriously. And folks, there is a lot of games out there that have an ampersand between the names, and we're here to cover them all for you.
Oh, and so many of them came out in the 70s. Dungeons & Dragons, Tunnels and Trolls, Bunnies and Burrows, Chivalry and Sorcery. Okay, maybe that's all off the top of my head.
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing. I don't begrudge anyone for getting that spirit up and saying, I'm going to do this and writing their own game. I think that's some of the greatest games of all times. And actually anything, whether it be games, whether it be bands, whether it be movies, whether it be books, whatever medium, there's always that hole that gets filled by people who have that energy and that spirit that say, you know what, I could do a better job. And they actually put on the boots and get the job done. So kudos to the folks who came up with this game. My only real critique is if you're going to get a good name, don't put an ampersand with 2 words on either side, because it's been done, everybody. Think of something better. I believe in you. Stu, do you have any final thoughts on Chivalry and Sorcery?
I just want to echo what you said and sort of just reaffirm that the cool thing about role-playing games is that it has always been a player-created kind of ecosystem, especially in the early days. So like, even though I hold Chivalry and Sorcery up as a game that I don't want to play, people played it and people had a good time with it, and 2 folks invested a lot of time and energy making it, and for no other reason than because they could and because they wanted to. And I think that that's awesome, and that is one of the things that really sets role-playing games in general over their 40-plus year history apart from just about everything else. It's what makes it special, is the fact that you could just do it, whatever it is, and that's cool.
Well, there you go. So this was another amazing episode of the Vintage RPG Podcast. Stu, where can the people find you?
They can find me on Instagram at VintageRPG, posting things like Chivalry and Sorcery. Well, maybe not. It's not really the sexiest cover, but still, role-playing games all the time, every day. It's amazing. It's fun.
You can find me on the Twitter at Handbreaker. I tweet about board games. I tweet about cute animals. I tweet about Dungeons and Dragons. You can also find my day-to-day adventures in podcasting and in life over on Instagram at John Hambone McGuire. If you like the show, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. Your reviews really do help other listeners to find us. If you really like the show, think about heading over to patreon.com/vintagerpg. We've got early release episodes. We've got unboxing videos. We've got some behind-the-scenes looks at Stu's novel and my RPG that I'm in the process of writing. We've even got a killer Discord community that we'd love for you to be a part of. Patreon.com/vintagerpg. So for Stu Horvath, I'm John Hambone McGuire. May the dice always roll in your favor.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like, review, and subscribe to the podcast. Every review helps other listeners to find us. The Vintage RPG Podcast is a ham-fisted production. Music by Dega West. Art by Schaefer Brown. If you like the podcast, you should also consider becoming a patron at patreon.com.